All right. So hi, I'm Jesper, and I want to tell you a little bit about these sessions we have. We have 15 parallel sessions in 22 rooms, so that's quite a lot. And you can all see it in the virtual program. We've been asked how many people can I expect, and that's really difficult to predict. So we're saying about 5 to 50 per room, and sometimes even more if we have some very popular talkers or presentations. So, but what's common for all the sessions is that they are 90 minutes long, and that can be one symposium, 2 workshops, or 2 exploratory seminars, or one of each, 4 oral presentations, and up to 10 posters. So those are the formats we have, and that's sort of the general gist of it. If you have a poster, it should be A0 and in portrait mode, and you need to print it and bring it to the conference. As we said, there will be up to 10 posters per room. We have actually just bought a little bit more poster room so that there will be a lot of space for everybody. So that's nice. And for each of the parallel sessions, we have 3 rooms where the poster session will appear. And so in preparation for that, you should prepare a very short presentation that can use your poster or just yourself to give people a teaser, so that up to 10 people, they will have about 2 minutes each where they present and say, this is what my poster is about, come and visit. And then we sort of let people roam free so that they can go and see the posters they find most interesting. So don't expect to have a beamer or a projector there, just that you have your poster and yourself. You can also upload your poster at Oxford Abstracts. There have been sent out mails about this, so please do, because that will then you can spur discussions even after the fact. Please go back just 1 second, thank you. We have previously said that we would give your poster an afterlife, where we would put it up at the conference. It turns out that was accompanied with technical difficulties, so we cannot do that, and we're really sad about it. But that's unfortunately how it is. Now you can go to the next one. If you have an oral presentation, you will have 15 minutes, and then 5 minutes for questions, and then you have 4, so that amounts to 80 minutes. And we allow for 10 extra minutes for changeovers, or if something goes a little bit wrong, some small delays. So that's for the oral presentations. If you go back again a little bit, thank you. For symposia, that's also, some symposia have 3, some have 4. It can be a little bit more loose because it's dependent on the symposium chair, the person who are chairing that session. Now. So, and for workshops and these new exploratory seminars, you have 45 minutes. We strongly encourage you to activate participants, to facilitate discussions, to have some hands-on during it, so that it doesn't become a 45-minute long presentation. That's not what we want with these.
Great, and so this links very nicely into what I'm going to talk about, which is getting the most from your ESERA contribution. This will be covering all the different formats, but hopefully there'll be some tips that will help answer the previous questions as well. The key points that I'm going to talk about today is going to be thinking about the intended outcome of your contribution, planning the content for your contribution, interactivity within your presentation, and then your presentation style. So a little bit about presenting more generally. First, I want to look at what outcome do you want from your presentation. So this is the most important thing to keep in mind when you're planning and presenting is what do you want to get from it? So are you looking for feedback? For example, if you're looking for feedback, you might want to make sure that you're giving opportunities for feedback, which I'll talk a bit more about with the interactivity part of it. Are you looking to get help on a work in progress? If so, you probably don't want to spend your full 15 minutes talking. You probably want to spend much less time with that and have more time for discussion and getting help and getting feedback. Or are you sharing a finished work, as was mentioned earlier, which I would perhaps say that sharing a finished work is not the end outcome of your presentation, but instead it is something you can do to achieve a more reactive goal from this. So for example, are you sharing your work so that you can create connections? In which case, make it clear who you are and what you want to connect with people about and what you want to talk about. Are you here to have people reference your work? In which case, you might want to make it clear during the presentation how your work links to other works, or how your work could be placed inside other frameworks or inside other, how they could connect with them. Or do you want to make a name for yourself at the conference? Do you want to stand out and have some sort of memorable outcome? For example, we have somebody in the department who at every conference that they go to, they like to be the weird format lady. So they want to make sure that when they do their presentation, they're doing something different, something memorable, something strange. And so people know if they want to see a weird format, they go to her presentations. Or if they don't want to see a weird format, they'll avoid her presentations. So you should think about what the outcome you want is. And once you have this outcome, you want to be clear in your plan, both to yourself, but also to your audience. So you want to be able to share your goal clearly and early within the presentation. And also you want to make it clear, why should we, the audience, care about what you're presenting, which was brought up in one of the Menti questions earlier. For presentations, you could consider having something like a roadmap. Like at the beginning of my presentation, I had these key points, which was just telling you, here's what we're going to be talking about. So it's like a little map where you can say to your audience, here's where we're going to go, come with me. And for posters, you might want to think about having some bold, clear entry points. So having some very visible text or figures that people can immediately relate to, which Peter will go over a lot more in his presentation, focusing more on visuals. Once you've got this idea of, what your goal is, you're going to be clear in your plan for it. You want to make sure that when you're presenting these contributions, you are limiting your content to only what they need to know. So please don't try to present your whole paper, because you're just not going to be able to. And it's much better that you present 10% of your work and it's 100% understood than you try to present 100% of your work and it gets 0% understood. So you might want to think about writing out a bullet point plan first, or like a list of what you want to cover. With presentations, try to limit the text on the slides. Peter, again, will talk more about some more sort of rules of thumb for this. And with posters, you want to make sure that you're using your poster as a discussion tool and not as a full summary. If you do want to give them a full summary, you could, for example, print out a copy of the study that it's about, or you could include a QR code that links to a video of you talking to it, or you could give them a business card that they can contact you about. It's a nice, with contributions like this, it's nice to think about, leave your audience wanting more, open room for this discussion. As you were saying in the one of the first Menti questions you had, a lot of you wanted to open room for discussion. If you leave them with some sort of like points they can discuss with you, that's better than overloading them and then leaving them not understanding. I do have one small exception to what I'm saying, the limit text on slides here. As we were mentioning earlier, there's some concerns around presenting in a non-native language. And there's been some previous conferences and workshops where people who weren't very confident in their speaking, they would write out one sentence or two per slide that said exactly what they wanted to say. So it was kind of like, pre-writing your own sort of caption for it even. So that's something that could be helpful if you are particularly, nervous about getting the phrasing right, or saying what you need to say. So that's something that you could potentially use if you find that the language barrier will be an issue. But as a rule of thumb, good to reduce text on the slides. We want to be able to consider your audience. So recognize your own expertise here. You are the only person who knows what you know. There may be other people who's even in your research group or in your study. They don't know exactly what you know, and you are up there for a reason. You were chosen to present up there. So you want to be able to recognize that you are the expert when you're presenting this. And there may be people who are in the same field as you, but they might not be in the same subfield, or same subfield but not in the same study. So make sure you're thinking about, are you using terminology, frameworks, methods that are understandable and accessible. And for this, we'll go more into how you can get more interactive input on this. But so, for example, you could consider polling your audience to see, does anybody else in this group use XYZ framework? Does anyone else know what this methodology is? And with posters, you're more likely going to be with a smaller group or a one-on-one, and you can just ask them. You say, have you used this do you know what this terminology means, or what do you work in? You could just ask them what their field is and what their expertise is. So make sure you're keeping that in mind throughout. And now we get on to probably what's going to be the bulk of this presentation. That's also, what we've been discussing previously, is making use of interactivity. And there are two, there's lots of reasons why this is helpful, but there are two ones that is nice to think about now. One is that it helps your audience to engage with your work. And the other being that it helps you to actively receive feedback, but also helps you to get the kind of feedback that you want. So you can customize this interactivity to get what you want out of this presentation. So, for example, if you're doing a presentation, I'm going to talk through a couple of different options. There's a cheat sheet that's on the website, we'll send a link to later, which has a list of a bunch of different pros and cons of different interactivity methods. But I'll go over three just now. The first one being just a simple hands up. This is very quick, it's easy, and you just say, which of you has experience with blah, blah, or which of you agrees with this statement, or, some very simple hands up. You just get a vote from the audience. It's a way of activating their brains a little bit and you can get a sense of who that audience is. To take that a step further, we can use a method called think, pair, share, which some of you may already be familiar with. The idea is you give them a question, allow them to think about it for a minute or two, and then group with the person next to them, or two people next to them, and then ask them to discuss it as a pair. And then afterwards, we will call out, you can call out, oh, what did this group, get a couple of responses. And that way you get a much more involved answers from it. And because everybody has to engage in it in the pair stage, it means that everybody is interacting with this. So that's a sort of nice follow along from the poll question. And the last thing you could consider doing is a Mentimeter or something similar that's like we have at the beginning of this workshop. It takes a little bit longer to set up, but there's loads of different options for different formats for collecting them. And it can be a really nice way of just making sure that you're getting all the information from everyone in the audience, and you can even save the results as a PDF later you can look at, which is also a nice thing about it. All of these do take time, but I think that it's worthwhile thinking about, is the time that I spend doing this more useful than the time that I spend, pushing information on these people, because that way you can really get what you want from it. With posters, there's a couple of more points. So one of them is including questions. So, for example, making sure that you include, I think it was actually a criteria of the poster when you submitted it, was that you had to have questions on there. And this wasn't some arbitrary rule. This was so that you can get feedback from the people you're talking to. You could also consider having something like maybe a QR code to a Padlet. We'll talk a lot more about Padlets later, and we'll use one later. But you can consider having something where people can actually write responses in a more detailed way. This is useful for both the presentations and the posters. There's actually already a Padlet set up for every single session. And so, for example, if you want to use Padlets during your presentation or symposium or poster, there is already, if you go to the program, each one has a little button there which says go to session Padlet. But we can talk more about this later. So something like this could be a useful way. If you have your own Padlet, you could really customize it to get responses that you want. And then there's a few options, a few examples here I have of some more sort of out-of-the-box thinking for interactivity. So you can see on the red one on the top right here, actually one of Jesper's posters, and there's a printed out chat log at the bottom that you can take off and you can flip through. At the top you have post-it notes that you can move around, and on the bottom you can see in the green one QR codes, and then on the left we see Peter's poster where it has an augmented reality projection mapping where people can interact with this video on it, which is maybe a more extreme level of the interactivity. We can't promise that we can provide tables for everybody. But if you have something like props or tools or printouts or something like this, please do consider bringing them along. Say if you have, if you're working on an educational game, then you could bring, the cards for that or the instructions for that or something with you. The next things I want to cover is a bit about presentation style. Just remember that the audience is your friends. They're here to try and help you and to try and support you. And they came to your talk because they thought it looked interesting. So they're here to support you. It's probably natural that you're going to get a bit of an adrenaline rush. And that's just, if you're going up on stage to go and, perform a concert or something, you probably get the same thing. But try to remember that everybody is in the same boat. They're all probably stressed about their own presentations, and that this is a friendly audience and ESERA is a friendly community, and they're all trying to be there to support you. Again, so with the presentation style, try and use your slides as prompts, not scripts. So try and, use pictures or images or things that prompt your memory. And my main tip that I would give for this is practice it multiple times. This is the one way where you can know how long it's going to take and you can know what you're going to say. And then you get a rhythm, you get a feel of what you want to say, and you don't end up ending the presentation and going, oh, did I say that really important thing? Because you haven't enough sort of, muscle memory that you know that you're hitting the important points. So please practice. And with posters, you might want to pre-prepare a couple of questions. You might want to pre-print it, which Peter will talk more about later. Or you might want to hand out maybe some contact cards or leaflets. As we were mentioning in the Menti questions before, please try to stick to the time. Plan to be under time. 15 minutes is less than you think. And do remember that the time that you use that is above your time, you're taking from somebody else. So it's nice to try and be respectful of others. And also for your own, for selfish reasons, if you have to get cut off by the chair, people will remember that you got cut off by the chair instead of remembering what you finished it on. So it's nice to be able to give your work the respect it needs by leaving it on a powerful, impactful endpoint instead of leaving it on one more thing as you're getting, rushed off stage. And the way to do this, to stick to time, is to practice multiple times. Then you know how long it's going to take. Yeah. My last point is maybe, I think with this practicing, and this are my main points that I want you to come away from, is end on a summary slide, not a thank you slide, because the thank you slides don't really tell you anything and are not very helpful. You can say thank you with your words, which is more authentic. Try to end on a summary slide that has key points of the presentation. You can consider having QR codes for important things like references and literature, and you can include your contact details on this end slide. And the nice thing about having an end slide like this is that then if there are questions at the end, people can say, oh, I remember they talked about, the intended outcomes at the beginning, or they talked about, planning at the beginning. And so they can look back over what you were talking about, and it's just a way to summarize, keep it fresh in their minds.
I want to start with pointing out that we'll provide you with a cheat sheet, some presenter tips, both from Oriel's presentation and from my presentation at the end of the whole workshop. So there's no point, or there's no need at least, to write things down as I'm presenting. I want to start with the following statement. A bad presentation will never ever be saved by a great use of visual components, but it can be support to a great presentation. And that's what most things are in design or art. There's not a single set of rules, there's not a single template that will guarantee such a great presentation. But it's important to find a style that is in line with both you as a persona, with your presentation style, and also in line with the subject and the context in which you're presenting. However, that does not mean that we cannot attempt to give you some rules of thumb that might help you getting there. In general, any type of visual aids, any type of slides, charts, props might boost a retention and an understanding of the story that you're telling. But it's important to continue reminding yourself that your content comes first. Your visual design is only a single tool of the storytelling that you have at use for yourself. And therefore, you have to use these visual aids quite strategically. It's not a decorative extra. It can introduce a level of clutter. Therefore, it's best to minimize text, minimize images, minimize the lines and the graphics that you're using. And if you do use a graphic or a text anywhere, it must serve a clear and direct purpose to the story that you are telling. It needs to be clear within the context of your presentation. It needs to be legible, and it needs to be relevant to the topic. If you do not do this, you might end up overwhelming the audience. The visuals should not compete with the story that you're telling in the spoken message, but they should very much support it. And at its base, when you design a template for your poster presentation or for the slides for your oral presentations, it's a good idea to think about grids, about positioning your text and your graphics. As a rule of thumb, I would say that 2 to 4 columns for posters in portrait modes is always a good idea. And for slides, in general, we will stick with 1 to 2 columns. Whatever you decide on doing, it's important to keep it consistent. It's important to come up with a system that works for the size of your graphics, for the size of your grids, to use a single title in the same typeface, the same size, a single way of handling captions, subtitles, and your body text, and throughout your presentation or your poster, stick to that. Once you have figured out the location of your graphic elements, it's important to start thinking about colors. In general, the baseline is your selection. It's important to have 2 main base colors, one supportive color, and then maybe your neutrals, black and white. The colors that you choose should be focused on achieving a high contrast. The body text itself is best going to be on a white background, and the text itself in general should be black or a high contrast with the background. You should use color to encode variables and not in general as a decorative element. And finally, it's important to think about accessibility. Try to avoid combinations of red and green to support colorblind accessibility of your presentation or your poster presentation. A simple trick in general for legibility is to make a grayscale PDF of your presentation and assess if it's still understandable in the way that you want to of your poster. As I said, there's very seldom a reason to have a colored background in a poster or a presentation, and it's almost always a bad idea to have images as a background, how much fun it might look behind your computer. For color spaces, there's 2 main color spaces that are somewhat important here in the context of this presentation. One is the subtractive color space of CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And then you have your additive color space of red, green, blue, think of light. Digital formats in general are often in RGB. And most printers, especially older printers, are always in the CMYK color space, but contemporary digital printers can also be in the RGB space. Anyway, what's important about this is that you take into consideration and ask explicitly to the print service that you're going to use for printing your poster presentation if they expect it to be made up in RGB or CMYK, because your colors will change if it's set up in the wrong way. In your computer-aided design software tool that you'll be using, this will be a setting somewhere. So it's a good idea to Google that up front. This is how it looks like in Photoshop, for example, where you can switch between the color space and RGB and CMYK. From color, we move on to your main building block in both your poster design, probably, and your presentation design for your oral presentations, and that is the text. In general, you want to avoid data dumps. As a rule of thumb, you could maybe use the following for slides: max 6 bullet points for 1 slide and 7 words per line. For posters, as a rule of thumb, again, it's a good idea to aim for max 100 words per section. I've included the poster template here from our university at the University of Copenhagen, not as an example of how to do great design, but more as a cautionary tale on how to not have a wall of text. So this is a lot more than 100 words per section, and the overall amount of words is much too high to be considered a legible and successful poster. So what is happening here is something that Oriol said before to avoid. It's not an overview of your entire paper, but the person who made this poster definitely attempted to do that. So in general, you want to have a lot less words than what is being used here. If you have figured out the content of your words, it's a good idea to start thinking about typeface design. In general, it's a good idea to choose one font family with a lot of different variants, like the example that I show here. It's a good idea to have a mix of variants for titles and for body text, but it's also good, as I said, to avoid different typefaces. Fonts come in different categories. I'm showing one here on the left, which is Garamond, a serif font. The serif means the little hooks at the end of where letters begin and start, which is reminiscent of the handwritten origins. And then on the right here is a font that I think is a decent font to use in any type of design, which is a sans serif font, a modern font. With here at the bottom, we have a monospaced font. A monospaced font means that in general, every ligature, every glyph, every character that makes up your typeface will have a specific distance to any other character. It's a lot of work to do typeface design really well. But a monospaced font will always have identical spacing in between, which makes them particularly good for coding because you want your data representation to always be on the same lines for the same amount of characters. So if you want to include code in your poster design or your presentation design, it's a good idea to use a monospaced font. But if you want to explore a little bit more our cheat sheet that we will share with you, we'll explain how to pick the fonts that fit your story and style a little bit more. When you are combining titles and text, it's a good idea to skip a body weight. For example, what I did here is to have bold for the titling and then a regular for the body and not medium for the body, for example, just to increase the contrast. For body text, it's a good idea to always stick to regular or book weights. In general, it's a good idea to avoid display or quirky fonts. They come from advertising, but they do not support a clear academic narrative unless you know exactly what you're doing. These fonts can distract more than that they help. There's one typeface that I wanted to mention. It's a typeface on the bottom right. If anybody has a guess which typeface that is in the orange circle, feel free to put it in the chat. And the chair, the conference chair, Jesper, will give you an amazing gift at the conference. Yeah, finally, text alignment. The default alignment is left aligned, which is especially good for readability purposes. It allows for beautiful negative space around it, makes it very readable. Other alignment variants that you will see is the right aligned, which you see here in the middle, which is there's not a lot of use for that. So if you use it, it needs to be a good reason, because in terms of legibility, it's a lot less than the default left align. And then you have center aligned, which is often good for titles, but in general, titling is also better than left aligned. So if you're in doubt, if you don't know what to do, use your titling and your body text all left aligned. What you should try to never do, and only do if you're forced by an editor of a journal or a template from your university, is to have a justified alignment. As you can see here, from a readability design point of view, it makes no sense. The spacing in between the words becomes extremely hard to just read it, and should just never be done. Final remark maybe about text is if you enable hyphenation in your text writer, make sure that it's set to the correct language. So sometimes what might happen is that your hyphenation settings are set in a different language than what you're writing in, and then the hyphenation will be wrong because of the grammar rules differ. So make sure that your text writer is set in the language that you're actually writing. Then I want to talk a little bit more about graphics. Now that we've covered text, this answers maybe, or hopefully, a little bit the question we had before about including tables and graphs. There's two types of graphics. First, I want to discuss vector graphics, which are represented through mathematical equations in containers like SVG or EPS. In general, if you want to include graphs or tables, it's a good idea to try to do this in vectors and not in bitmap images, which we will discuss in a moment. Tables are better for precise comparisons. So if you have a small data set, but if you have a larger data set, especially for a presentation in slides, you want to show a graph and not your raw data. If you do show a graph, in general, it's a good idea to have on the x-axis your cause and on the y-axis your effects. Sometimes you want to show an image. Images are often made up by pixels, small rectangles made of a color, like a digital photograph, in containers like PNG, JPEG, and so that's very fine to use. Just remember that if you're going to scale these graphics up for a poster, that they are set up in a high enough resolution, and that they don't become pixelated and lower in quality, which is not an issue when you use SVG graphics. If you have an image, it's a good idea to point out details in your graphics that you want the audience to focus on with things like circles or arrows. Copyright is also important when you use graphics, just like making references to academic content. Make sure that you reference images and typefaces correct. Make sure you avoid images that are hard to read from a distance, and avoid relying entirely on visuals without engaging with the audience directly. Software, I'm going to be short about this. If it gets the job done for you, then it gets the job done. However, it's important for me to note that PowerPoint is a slide creation tool and not a design software. So there are quite a lot of better alternatives to PowerPoint if you want to create a poster presentation. Some open source and commercial software packages are also included in the overview sheets that we will share at the end of the presentation. Then quickly before ending, I want to focus specifically on some tips and tricks for the academic presentation design. And then in the end, we go to poster design. It's a good idea to have summary slides, as Oriol said, at the end of each section or at the end of your presentation for your audience to keep track. If you're going to use an animation, make sure that it's functional. Animations can be functional, especially if you use them in a progressive reveal way, to keep your visuals more digestible and not overloading your audience with too much information at the same time. But try to avoid 3D effects or too many effects in general as you're presenting on a 2D screen, and it might be taken away from the story that you're telling. At the conference at ESERA here in Copenhagen, we'll be using the 16:9 ratio for our presentations, for the projections. Make sure that if you're designing your content, your presentation, that it fits this ratio. So 16 would be your width and 9 would be your height. The older standard used to be 4 width by 3. And so if you want to be pragmatic, you can always design for 4 by 3 and leave a border on the left and right so that you can reuse it at different venues. But we are going to use the 16:9. In practice, it's also a good idea to keep into mind that some of the venues that we'll be using, there will be a lot of people. The projects might be a bit short, so some of the content at the bottom might at times be blocked by the heads of people sitting in the front. Of course, in our conference, we'll try to avoid it, but not every conference is, as professional as we will be. So it's a good idea to maybe keep in mind that your most important information will be in the center of your screen, and definitely not at the bottom, as it might fall off for people sitting at the back. Then I want to add a bit academic poster design. As Jesper already said, for ESERA, we will be using the A0 in portrait mode for all of our poster presentations. If you come with a landscape mode portrait, we will hang it in portrait and everybody will need to tilt their heads to read it, so that's not advisable. In general, you want to make your titles large and visually dominant. As we said before, minimize your text, maximize the white space and your visuals, so your graphics to draw the attention. Effective posters deliver a snapshot of your research to grab the attention of a passing audience. And the layout of your poster design should match the reading patterns that we naturally use, or especially that we use in the West, maybe in this case. Going from the top to bottom and from the left to the right. In this poster that I've selected here, that is followed somewhat, but not in a completely ideal way, as you can see, as the reading pattern is a little bit chaotic and all over the place. If you have some logos that you want to use in your poster presentations, make sure that you use them small enough so that they don't become the center of the attention. In general, it's a good idea to pre-print your posters. We have some open source tools in our cheat sheet that you can use for that as well. Hang them up in the office. and maybe engage some colleagues to see if they read the story in the way that you want to. A presentation, a poster presentation is both a poster that serves as a standalone design where you want people to read it even if you're not there, but it also serves as a presentation tool. Make sure that you have tried and experimented with presenting when you stand next to your poster. Again, it's a good idea to involve some colleagues so that you can get some feedback. And maybe you want to redesign some of your poster aspects based on the experience. I quickly want to run over a good schedule for designing posters, but it can also work, I think, for designing oral presentations. You start with planning before you start designing anything. Identify the purpose, the audience, the venue. What is the main message? What's your story structure? As a rule of thumb, you can keep into the back of your mind, what do you want the audience to walk away knowing after they witnessed your poster or your presentation? Then you move that information and turn it into low fidelity drafts and sketches using pencils, whiteboards to organize ideas. Maybe you want to use post-it notes, for example, and map out the layout hierarchies. What is the main information? What's the background, the methods, the results of the story that you want to tell? Focus here on the storyboarding of your study and format it like if you're telling a narrative. Once you have this low fidelity design, you can transform it and move on to the actual design into a polished layout. Try to keep a clear visual hierarchy. White space and chunking of information are going to be tools that you want to think about explicitly, because we do have a tendency to fill up every space in our poster, but it will have the negative and the opposite effects. You want to have white space around containers and text to increase legibility, to increase readability, and to direct the flow of information of how somebody will perceive your design. Think about your typography for readability, set up a system for titles and subtitles and captions, as we said before, and design your visuals and data graphics that reinforce the key messages. Then once you've done that, you want to refine. As I said, it's a good idea to do mock presentation, ask your mentor, ask your advisor, ask your peers, ask your colleagues, ask family members or friends to give feedback when you tell the story. It's a good idea to use checklists, have a look at the conference where you're presenting, if you follow all of the rules. In our case, it's very simple. As we said, A0 in portrait mode, but in other conferences that might not be the case. Simplify your language, simplify visual clutter, rethink if you need every element on the poster to tell your story. And as a rule of thumb, if a viewer cannot grasp your message in 10 seconds of your academic posters, you might want to rethink and redesign the overall structure. Then it's time to share. Prepare the interactive elements. You can draw inspiration from what Oriol said before. In order to do that, anticipate the audience questions and do some work tryouts to make sure that you're ready for the conference. And then finally, try not to forget your poster when you board your transportation. And when you come to us, you can print it here in Copenhagen, but it's gonna be a lot of more stress if you can just bring the poster from home in a cardboard container or a plastic container. And this is my, I listened to oral presentation as well, so this is my summary slides. As a final note, which draws upon my own research, I think that developing and designing slides and posters not only allows you to communicate to your peers and your colleagues and the general public, but I also strongly believe that it might help you restructure and remodel thoughts of your own research, leading to further insights. And I hope that some of the tools and the strategies that we've discussed today might help you get there. The references that were used in for this presentation are also included in the handouts that we will share soon.